I'm excited to share the latest episode of Deal Sorcery. This one dives deep into leadership, company values, and scaling through culture. Our guest is Dan Konigsberg, the founder of Campminder, which is a leading provider of summer camp management software. Dan and his team built Campminder for over 20 years without bringing on outside investors. Along the way, private equity firms were eager to connect, so Dan fills us in on the type of outreach that worked and the type that really didn't, as well as what he was looking for in a partnership. Dan's an awesome guy with a unique perspective on company culture and values that are worth listening to, whether you're in a deal sourcing role, building a company, or in any field. This is Deal Sorcery.
Dan, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. Great to see you.
You too, buddy. You too. Thanks for coming on. So I know this is probably the end of it's got to be like the busiest period for Campminder, right? Like how was the summer for you guys?
The summer was it's always crazy. This is my 23rd summer having Campminder as a thing I do. And it's not only the summer, it's the ramp up to summer. So starting in about April, you put yourself in the shoes of a camp director or full-time camp staff member. You feel that pressure when the weather starts getting warmer, that you're about to have hundreds of other people's kids descending upon you, and you want to feel really prepared. And oftentimes that results in, a lot of questions for our team and making sure that, administratively everything is ready to go. So starting in about April, May, things get crazy, and then tends to taper off around mid-July. People are settled in and they're running their camps. But certainly by the end of the summer, our team members need a vacation. And so do the camp people. So do the camp directors.
Is there like a Campminder wide, just dark period when you come into the fall where it's just like everybody, just take some time off?
Yeah, I wouldn't call it a dark period. I think we try to stagger it a little bit, but there's definitely always been a lot of activity and things happening. We've been growing consistently for 23 years. So that doesn't really lend itself well to taking time off for everybody, but it definitely settles down a little bit. Our fiscal year starts in September, so it is a little bit challenging. You have your year-end rituals and the closing of everything, and then the strategic work and figuring out what you're planning to do for the next year and communicating all of that. So there is a steady push. It probably settles in a little bit around now. Maybe the next few weeks they'll start to settle in and get to more of a maintainable, sustainable place.
Yeah. It's got to be crazy. I bet. So I've had the joy and the benefit of kind of hearing a lot of the backstory and DMB fan site days and all this sort of stuff. But for the folks that haven't and aren't familiar with Campminder, can you describe Campminder? What's the Campminder offering and maybe some of the story behind it?
Well, today Campminder, we're proud to work with over 1,000 of the leading summer camps, especially in the US, but also throughout the world. And we say that we help with management, logistics, and engagement technology for camps. So that's everything from how a prospective family first interfaces with the camp to request information, and then the process by which the camps will recruit those campers, to registration and the financial aspect of billing and invoicing, to collecting all of their forms online, whether it's on the web or through mobile, and transportation logistics and healthcare and scheduling, to hiring staff and managing alumni and having an app for parents to see photos of their kids if they're away at either day camp or sleepaway camp, and send letters to their kids that get printed out and delivered to the kids' bunks if they're at sleepaway camp. So it's a very comprehensive technology solution. And what we try to do is find the best practices in the camp industry from industry leaders, and then build solutions that make it easy for all of the camps to improve the way they operate and create. Our purpose is more and better shared experiences.
What is there one feature of the product today that folks love the most?
Well, I think our app has been a big hit. In recent years, we have this app called Companion. Companion is part of Campminder. It maybe should have just been called our Campminder's mobile app. If I were a better marketer, if we were better marketers, we would just get our brand name out there more. People tend to understand it, but ultimately, the way it works is that my kids were at summer camp, at sleepaway camp for about 7 weeks over the summer. So I get to experience this as a parent now. Camps are uploading hundreds of photos a day. And it used to be that parents are looking for a needle in a haystack, trying to find a glimpse of the back of their kid's head. Oh, that's like Dax's ear. But now we have integrated facial recognition that parents can opt into, and it's very effective. And you get a notification in the middle of your day. It's like, here, we found a picture of Dax, and there he is. And you can still browse through all the photos. That's a great way for the camps to keep families engaged and feel excited about what they've ultimately invested in as a parent. Like, we're spending a good amount of money to give these experiences to our kids, and they're learning and growing, and we get to feel like a part of it, and also sending them letters, but then dovetailing that into the registration process and all the forms, and making it really convenient and easy to scan like your kid's physical from the doctor and just take a picture with your phone like you would mobile deposit a check, and then streamlining that process for the camps. Like that whole thing has been really exciting for our clients and for the industry.
Dan, can you, as our audience being private equity investors, do you mind giving us a quick rundown of Campminder's private equity journey? I'm thinking things like acquisitions, transactions, investors, and like a timeline.
We're bootstrapped, basically. I mean, we do have investors now, but we still operate the company largely like a bootstrapped company. I founded Campminder in 2001. Dan asked a little bit about the origin story and the background. I went to camp as a camper starting at age 9 at sleepaway camp, but even before that as a day camper. I went to the same camp that my dad and my uncle happened to be the first 2 campers ever enrolled in Maine, called Camp Tacahoe. Dan alluded to this Dave Matthews Band website. When I was in high school, I created a website that eventually ended up winning a couple of VH1 My Music Awards. If I were in my home office, you would see that trophy, which is pretty neat. But by the time I was a junior in college, and I needed to figure out what I was going to do with myself, rather than just being a camp counselor, because there wasn't really a place for me to go and grow into at camp. I got an internship working at an advertising company, and leveraging what I knew about software development that was largely self-taught. I was a minor in computer science in college, and I wanted to learn how to build web-based database applications, kind of for the purpose of automating this Dave Matthews Band website that was taking a ton of time to manually update every day. And in that process, I found myself missing camp a lot. I wanted to be at camp, even though I wasn't there. So I was looking at the way that they posted photos at the time, and I stumbled on their online staff application. That was when the light bulbs went off for me. It was like, this is sending an email to somebody. And then what are they doing with this email? How are they interviewing people? Where are they keeping all their notes on their interviews? How do they hire people? Where does that information go? How is it shared among the different people who work at the camp? And that was really the thing. I went home, happened to be July 4th. I canceled my plans to go out that night, started working on a new staff application for my camp. And by the end of the summer, I showed it to the staffing coordinator at my camp, who loved it, started building it. And by the time I graduated from Emory in 2002, I had connected with 4 or 5 camps that all wanted the product. It had grown beyond just staff at that time. And that was the start. And it was a customer funded journey. It was just working very hard myself. I felt very lucky the first time I found somebody who was willing to help me with what I was doing, because I was largely overwhelmed. And I think this dovetails into, I know eventually we'll talk about culture, but I think that actually one of the biggest competitive advantages I've had as an entrepreneur is not having been corrupted by the corporate world, and not having had that, domineering boss who's like, you do this thing. I felt very grateful when I had the first person and the second person helping me. I was like, thank you so much for taking this painful work off of my plate. It's too much for me. And it continued for a long time as a bootstrapped, customer funded journey with a lot of exciting growth. And by a long time, I mean 19 years before I started thinking about what partnership would look like, or when that started making sense to me as something that I would want to do. I was always very hesitant about the idea of having investors, because I'd heard some horror stories, and I really enjoy still what I'm doing. And I didn't really love the idea of potentially feeling like investors have only money in their mind and are going to force me and the company and our team to do things that might be for short-term gain and not for the best interest of the long-term interest of an industry I actually genuinely really care about. So I really avoided it for a long time. And I did somewhere along the line, I don't remember when, start getting random emails from people I didn't know. I wasn't somebody who had an exit strategy. I didn't start Campminder because I wanted to one day sell the company and, have some big exit and like live on a golf course. I'm also a human being who has a family and kids and somewhere along the lines, it was like, okay, like I have to figure this out. My kids are 8, like or at the time what 2019 and 2020, they were 5. It's like, I don't see them taking over the company. So like, what is going to happen long-term here? And also, how are we going to grow? What is the story that we're trying to write here? But for a long time, those outreaches were just fundamentally uninteresting to me. I didn't want to have those conversations. I felt like we had a good strategy in place. We knew what we were doing. We knew what our clients needed. I always found myself in what I called heads down execution mode, working on the things, whether it was helping to build the product or whether it was looking to hire the people who could be on our senior leadership team to take some burden off of me, and to do things better than I could do in different areas of the business. So I found myself politely declining most of the requests that would come in. Some people sent in little gifts, hey, here, we're a private equity firm, like here's a something or other. And maybe that would start a conversation. But generally speaking, I would say the conversations I did have for most of that time didn't really get me excited. They all sounded the same. I wasn't really able to distinguish one person from another. The conversations would be like, we have a fund of X $100 million and we, have a person who can help you with growth. And we specialize in something vaguely related to what you do. And, we've helped these companies you've never heard of do something. And that was my experience.
Well, we definitely want to dig into all of that uninteresting outreach and make you...
Sorry for all of you private equity sourcers out there who might be offended by that, but that was what it felt like to me.
Doesn't surprise me at all. And I think that's some of the stuff that hopefully people can pull out from this conversation. Maybe you could tell me how you and Dan originally met. And my understanding is following up is key in deal sourcing, but Dan was particularly persistent. Can you recall any of that?
Yeah, I do remember. Dan was persistent, and Dan had somebody else there named Naveed who I came to know. I think that Saren's intro to us was through one of these gifts. I think it was like some kind of toolkit. Like it was like he sent me a screwdriver and a wrench or something, and it was something like, we have the tools that you need. It was a little kitschy, but I think that actually, Dan was a steady name that would show up in my inbox every now and then. I probably politely declined him many, many times. Naveed occasionally would be like, I'm going to be in the Boulder area. Do you want to get coffee? And I think one time I said, sure, come by the office. Like I can't promise you that I'm not going to have something that I'm going to have to jump on, but hopefully it'll work out. And one time we did get together and had a conversation and had more conversations somewhere along the line.
I feel like it was probably like once a quarter, like, hey, Dan, I'm going to be in Boulder. Do you have time for coffee? Hey, Dan, I'm going to be in Boulder. Do you have time for coffee?
Sorry, no.
Yeah, I think it was probably a couple of years of that. And then if I recall, I could be wrong. I don't have all my notes, but I feel like I probably showed up there one time with like a binder full of information and was like, hey, let me tell you why, like, we need to work together,
Yeah. I mean, I think that the follow-up is important. Like, as a sourcer, you probably feel like you're annoying people sometimes, but seeing your name over and over again, like you ultimately became somebody who I knew. I knew what you did. I knew what company you worked for. It can be effective. There's probably good ways to do it and bad ways to do it. I think you did it well. well enough to have a number of conversations over the years. Many people haven't had those conversations with me.
I remember from some of those sit downs, like one of the things that always resonated with me, Dan, is like you always felt like somebody very value driven, right? Like you had, and you already talked about this a little bit, but like there's certain things that you felt were very important to you and to your company and that you wanted to instill in it. So like, I'm just curious, before like diving into anything else, like what are those specific values? Like what's your North Star or your company's North Star that you kind of, point toward or turn to guide yourself and your company?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think that maybe even more interesting than what the values are themselves, which I'm happy to talk about, is how the values came to be. Because I think that entrepreneurs tend to hear that the best companies have core values. And then they're like, all right, like we've got to go have a brainstorming session and figure out what our core values should be, because they read Good to Great or Built to Last by Jim Collins. And I agree, it's important for a company to have a strong set of values. It's more important for those values to be authentic and not just some aspirational set of words that don't actually have meaning and don't come to life in the business in some way.
So why was it important to you to create a set of values?
Because I was going to screw the whole thing up if I didn't. I started a company out of college. I wasn't an MBA. I didn't go to CEO school. I had some natural leadership ability for sure. I had some certainly technical skills. You would call me maybe a CTO in a way, a head of product, somebody who had like enough business savvy to understand the problems and the jobs to be done at a camp from personal experience and why it was painful for people. And I also had the technical skills to bring those to life and to work with other engineers to help me build a product. But the skills that are required to do that well enough to get people to pay money to have a product are different from the skills that are needed to grow and build a sustaining, successful company over the long haul. And I think that what was true for Campminder and my experience is probably true for many entrepreneurs, which is that at a certain point, what got you here won't get you there. At a certain point, your company has outgrown your capacity and knowledge about how to lead that company successfully. And in my story, I had a pregnant wife with twins in 2014. Campminder probably had 30 or 35 employees at the time, probably had 500 or so clients. And the complexity of running an organization like that was very different from the complexity of running an organization when it was me and another engineer and one person helping to support. Because I could talk to each of those two people every day, multiple times, and we were aligned kind of automatically. But when you have 30 some odd people, you're not aligned all the time. And all sorts of things are happening every day that you as the entrepreneur don't know about, can't know about, shouldn't know about. And I didn't have a way of having awareness of what those things were and to make sure that my way of thinking, my context was shared by everybody. So I started to experience, and we started to experience cracks in the foundation, situations where employees weren't feeling it like the way that just automatically they had been prior to that moment. Without going into the details of how I got here, I ended up with an executive leadership coach, and I was not having fun. I was in a lot of pain and suffering because I didn't know what to do. There were certain elements things that were happening in the business that were just not working despite my best effort. And maybe I would have been inclined to blame this person or that person for not doing what was needed. But what I needed to see was that was on me. So in working with the senior, with an executive leadership coach, it was kind of a slap in the face in a positive way. It's like, Dan, you have a successful company here. And I'm sure it feels good to know that you created that. But we don't get to just enjoy the positive things and then deny responsibility for the negative things. Those problems, and especially to the extent that you, Dan, allow them to persist and continue, are your responsibility. You have to take ownership of that. And while I think I knew that in some way, that was a rude awakening for me. And it snapped something in me and it said, okay, Dan, ultimate responsibility, lies on your shoulders. It's up to you to make this company what you want it to be. So the work with Stephen, my coach, was very deep. It was, what is the meaning of all of this? What is the purpose? Why are you doing this? What are your values? And I didn't know the answer to those questions, so I had to do some work on myself to come to understand why I was running this Campminder company in the first place. What was I out to do? What kind of impact do I want to make on the world? What is the biggest game that I could play? And this led to bringing in a facilitator to do an exercise with me and a couple other people on the team called Mission to Mars, where he came in and he said, "You're going on a mission to Mars. Who's coming with you?" And after asking, "What do you mean?" He explained to me, right, it's hard to go to Mars. So first of all, you need to have a capable team that's going to go to Mars with you. But once you're on Mars, you're going to form a new colony of Campminder, and everything that happens in Campminder from that moment forward is based off of these key people. Who are they? So I made my list and the other people made their list. And then the next question was, why? Why are you bringing Frank? Why are you bringing Lauren? Why are you bringing Katie? And then that landed in a number of phrases or words like, this person does whatever they need to do to make it happen. I can count on them. They're humble. They're fun to work with. If I'm going to go do this thing, like I want it to at least be fun. They uplift other people. And then we did that for every person and ended up with a whiteboard full of words and phrases. And then we grouped those words and phrases into categories because they naturally landed in categories. And those categories are our core values. We had to come up with the right words to express what that category really meant, but it landed in 6 core values. And what I love about this story and the advice I would give to any entrepreneur is that this was not a brainstorming, aspirational, creative session to come up with a list of words that we wanted to be true about Campminder. It was an authentic expression of discovering or uncovering what we already were at our best. And then that, from that moment, became the filter for our people. You want to have the right people in the right seats. We say this all the time in business, but what does that really mean? Well, the right seats are understanding what needs to be accounted for. What are the accountabilities? And do you have clarity of what those roles are? Because any happy employee needs to have clear expectations so that they can feel good that they are meeting those expectations or exceeding those expectations. So do they get it? Do they want it? Do they have the capacity to do it? These are all tenets of EOS, entrepreneurial operating system. But then the right person aspect of it is, do they align with these core values? And how do you measure this? I like to think of it as a board game. So in this board game, you roll the dice and you move your piece forward X number of spaces, you land on the red square. But in this game, the red square is you are confronted with a real world problem or situation. How are you going to deal with it? And you have 6 cards in front of you, and that moment calls for you to play some of those cards. So one of our core values is be admirable. Is a client asking for a feature that we're not going to build because we just can't? Like, it's not enough people need it, or there's no ROI, or it's too complicated and we don't have the team to do it. Be admirable in that moment would be to be honest and candid and real with that client and say, thank you for sharing that idea. We just need to tell you the truth. It's not something that's on our roadmap. And you can do the same thing with any of the core values, but these moments call for us to behave in certain ways. They call for us to get to a how. How am I going to deal with this situation? So the idea is, for each of those core values, in the moments where we're called to behave in that way, do I implement that core value 80% of the time or more, 50 to 80% of the time, or less than 50% of the time? And that's what culture is. Like, culture is the norm. It's like the zeitgeist, the way it feels in our space, what it is like, how we do things, how we communicate with one another, how we communicate with our clients. So to enforce a strong culture, you have to be clear about what your values authentically are and ensure that everybody knows what they mean and brings the right behaviors into those moments where they're called to behave in those ways.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it feels like just like a shared story, right? Or like it's ensuring, like obviously we all talk about like ensuring we're all rowing in the same direction, right? But like you're talking about these values of like this is our shared story, like this is we're communicating across the board that like this is how we're going to do things, this is who we are at our core, and like that's your shared experience, your shared story, and ensuring that you and the leadership team are communicating like this is our shared story and this is how we resolve those sort of problems.
And more than communicate, you're right. And more than communicating is behaving that way ourselves, leading by example. This is what it looks like to be admirable. This is what it looks like to wonder. And we miss them. We're human beings. We miss the mark sometimes too. So also being open to feedback when people have that feedback to share with us, and creating an environment where it's psychologically safe to offer that feedback, not being defensive. If I'm going to give feedback to somebody else, I better be willing to take it in myself. But yes, creating context to me is like the leadership superpower. We want to hire people who live the core values and behave in accordance with the core values that we have, and to create enough context for them and clarity, organizational clarity about what are we up to? What are we afraid of happening? What do we want to happen? What do we see? What's the landscape? What are our goals? What are we going after? How are we trying to serve our customers? And then hire people who are better at those things than we are, and empower them and give them enough autonomy so that they can come up with their own creative solutions about how are we going to get from here to there, as long as we do it using the Campminder way, or the values that we have. That, in my experience, has led to really, really great outcomes. And it's also more fulfilling for each person because they get to have autonomy and agency in their role. And it's not just being an order taker and being told, I want you to do this thing.
You mentioned that like the development of these values, right, was more of a discovery process, and it kind of came out of necessity, right? Like you were saying, it sounded like you were saying, I felt like I was bumping up against the ceiling in terms of like my leadership potential and my leadership ability. Like I could only go so far, and I didn't know how to get beyond that. So did this discovery process unlock that ceiling for you and for your leadership team?
Yeah, and it continues to this day. I mean, I can draw a straight line between that moment, the mission to Mars, and then the articulating of the core values very clearly, the communicating to the whole team about this is what we've done. These are the core values. These are the expectations from this point forward. And if this isn't you, that's okay. It doesn't mean you're a bad person. It just means that this may not be the right place for you. And we're not just going to kick you out the door. We're going to communicate about this and we're going to coach. But it led to some people self-selecting out of the company at that time. In very rare instances, it led to, some people being unable to align themselves with those core values, and us having to have a hard conversation with them about it, because there's no room in the organization for it creates too much friction in the organization when most people behave a certain way and then some people don't, and it's tolerated. I've heard this saying, culture is what you tolerate. It's what you allow to continue to be. And it's like the lowest common denominator of that, because your highest performers who do behave the way that we want to behave are going to be asking themselves, why is this allowed here? Like, this doesn't work. And when it's done really well and it's done consistently, I mean, we've been listed as one of Outside Magazine's best places to work in America for each of the last 7 years. Hopefully there's another one coming out. Hopefully we'll have it again for 8 years in a row. That started happening right after this. And then you could look at our financial performance and our business performance and our client acquisition and our client satisfaction, all of those business metrics, they all go up starting in that moment. And also, importantly to me, my sanity as a leader.
Yep. It's interesting, right? I feel like we entered this conversation thinking like we're going to talk about culture, but like I think the conversation is really about values, right? Like, in those, like, being the kind of cornerstone of culture, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I say this to my kids. Even just yesterday, I said it to my daughter. She was having a emotional reaction to something or other. She was probably hangry, but I reminded her. I said, in each moment, we get to choose who we want to be. So if you have a culture and a company of everybody having this awareness that you get to choose who you want to be, and who we want to be at Campminder, who we are at Campminder is people who behave these ways, then you have a lot of experiences among employees and coworkers and customers who experience your company this way. It becomes who you are. And that's what culture is.
Yep. It sounds like having that shared story and getting everybody aligned to that shared story, right? And not just having a story, but living up to that story, right?
Yeah, yeah. Having the story is the easy part. Being the story is the harder part.
Being the story. I love it.
So people who are aligned with the story and those values are the right people to bring along on the mission. Can you talk about culture and how you get those people to join?
Yeah, it's interesting. In my experience, it becomes less about getting those people to join and more about almost creating a magnetic force. So imagine that by intentionally being a certain way, who we choose to be, who we want to be, it's almost as though the right people are attracted to us. Like they seek us out now. They want to be a part of this. They email us. They send notes on LinkedIn saying, I love camp. I love what it did for me. I see your core values on your website. Like, this is who I am. I want to be a part of a place like this. This is what I want to do for work. And they rise to the top consistently. So it's less of like going out to get them. I mean, of course we do job postings, and when we find a need and we need to hire for a role, we'll put it out there. But oftentimes the people have been seeking us out now. It wasn't always that way. In the earlier days, maybe it was more like we put a job posting out there and people would apply. And then our process has to be aligned with these core values too. How do you, in a short time, suss out from somebody whether they are likely to be a core values fit? Usually it's about understanding their past behaviors in certain situations to see how they dealt with things and do those behaviors align with our core values. But it's not perfect. And then our interview process to this day still ends with a conversation with me that's less of an interview and more of me being very direct and honest with somebody and saying, look, this is our culture. And I can't figure out in an hour or in 90 minutes if this is you. But when you're here, we're going to experience one another every day. And in a non-threatening way, the message is kind of, look, you're going to love it. If this really is you, and if it's not you, you want to grow into this and you want that feedback and you are willing to do the work to be that, great. This is going to be the best place you've ever worked. You're going to absolutely love it here. But if it's not you, it's going to be painful for us and for you. And it won't work. So you need to look at yourself in the mirror and ask yourself, is this the place that you want to be? Is this what you want to sign up for? It's more on them than it is us. Our job is to just set very clear expectations that this is what's expected. This is what each core value means. This is what the behavior looks like. This is what the behavior doesn't look like. And if we're aligned on that, then we can bet with a high degree of confidence that it's going to work out. And most of the time it does. It's very rare that it doesn't work out now.
I know it was a long time where you didn't consider this route, but thinking about the importance of values and culture, and how it relates to partnering with investors, what kinds of investor approaches really resonated with you? And were there any that stood out either positively or negatively in how they aligned with your vision, your values, your culture, how they thought about growth and building your company?
For sure. I mean, I would say, first of all, the most important thing in choosing an investment partner in general is the who. Who is the person? Like, do you want to work together? Do you have the same values? Because if there's a values mismatch between an investor and an entrepreneur, or investor and that team, forget it. Like, one of our core values is not make as much money as possible despite the wreckage that may occur and in the fastest time period. That's not a core value of Campminder. In having conversations, clearly some of the investors who I've talked to over the years, that was really what they wanted. And I don't blame them for it. I get it. Like, there's institutional capital coming in. The institutions need to have a return on their investment in 5 years. And the name of the game is we're going to make this business look on paper as good as it can look within that time frame so that we can then flip it and sell it to the next person who's going to do it their way again. For me, that was not the story that I wanted Campminder to have, especially the people who I love and who have devoted their lives to working in this company. That was not the path that I wanted to lead them on. Whereas the small number of people that I did have serious conversations with did feel values aligned, did feel like, yeah, we want to, like, I like growing a business, but it's more about what are we doing for the world? Like, what good is happening here? How much is our product helping people? How much is our service helping people? What are the outcomes that are happening as a result of what Campminder is doing in the world? Financial numbers are lagging indicators that they indicate how much value are we creating in the world. They are not the goal in and of themselves. So and I'm different from other people maybe, but for me, if the conversation was only about numbers, that was not going to resonate with me, and it was not somebody that we were ever going to do business in. But if it was about culture and it was about building an excellent organization, like doing good in the world while also making money and running a great business, those are the conversations that went somewhere.
Are there things that private equity firms could learn in the way of how to build a great culture from your experience, right? Like, I know that's probably a tough question outside in, but like, if you were going about launching a private equity firm today, your own investment firm, right? Like, what would you do? And like, how would you, because I assume maybe this is wrong. I assume you would build kind of a values and culture first sort of firm, but like, you also have to balance, like, delivering returns and all this sort of stuff. But I'm curious, like, what would you do if you were building your own investment firm?
I mean, it's a really interesting question. And it's something I've thought about, because Campminder, fortunately is at a stage in its growth, 23 years in, where we're starting to look at M&A as something that may make sense as a path to continue to grow, but also importantly, as a path to continue to make a bigger impact in the world. We think we're a good company doing good things, and maybe we can have a bigger influence beyond just the influence and the impact that we make today. So how do we differentiate ourselves, and if it were just purely a PE firm, how would we differentiate ourselves? It would be about an authentic interest in understanding what drives the entrepreneur. Why did they get into business in the first place? What do they want out of their business? People have all kinds of different reasons. Like, some people are at a point in their career where they've been doing their thing for a long time and they're just kind of ready to be done. Other people, perhaps they started a business, it's growing slower than they hoped. They had a different story in their head about what would be possible, and they don't find themselves surrounded with people who have been entrepreneurs and have been successful, and what works and what doesn't work. And they're tired of making mistakes, and they want to find a faster path to get from here to there. So I would say first and foremost is like trying to develop a personal connection with an entrepreneur. Very hard to do through cold outreach, because cold outreach can feel like all of the cold outreach. I get cold outreach from PE sourcers, and I get cold outreach from, the person who has like lead gen software and all of the many people who have that, which, I have empathy for salespeople. We sell too. So I don't want to like dismiss people, but you kind of have to, and you get overwhelmed by it. So, I would try to find a real connection to the human being beyond just, hey, I see that you're the CEO of Campminder and I see dollar bills in your eyeballs and I want to like capitalize on that. I would rather have a conversation come to me. It's like, hey, it seems like we have a mutual connection in this camp director. Like, we know the same people, or to get introduced to me by somebody who is a mutual connection. It's like, hey, I'd like you to meet this person. They're interested in investing, but like that's not really it. They're interested in what you're doing. They want to hear your story. Hopefully that's authentic and not just a tactic. But those would be more successful to me than just another person who I don't know, like seemingly trying to get something from me.
So it sounds like the two things you're kind of recommending, the two things that you would think about is like leveraging network introductions, right? The ability to kind of, work through your network to get in front of somebody. But that the other one I kind of heard was take interest in, or what they're actually doing, right? And like what they're trying to accomplish, and like how can you, I guess, to an extent, come to the table and provide value or provide insights on that. Is that right?
Yeah. Well, what is the entrepreneur like? we all have needs, and we're all in different stages of our development and different stages of our growth and different stages of our lives. So, if somebody if somebody who I really believe can help me with what I need shows up, and I genuinely think that they can help me, that's a conversation I'm interested in having. In 2020, when COVID hit and it really had an impact on the camp industry, the whole world, but the camp industry that is only gathering, Campminder wasn't about to curl into a corner and put ourselves in a ball and wither away. We actually saw a lot of opportunity arise despite the pain, but we needed strategic partnership to help us figure out financially, how are we going to end up on the other side of this strong? How are we going to keep our team together and strong through this? How are we going to come out on the other side of this and grow? Because we knew our camps were going to come back because people were going to be desperate for camp, to have human connection again after being locked away in isolation. So the conversations that resonated with me in that time period were the ones that I felt like the person I was talking to had experience that would be helpful to us, not just dollars. Everyone in this business has dollars to invest. They're dying on a vine to figure out where to put those dollars. I didn't need dollars are helpful, but really needed expertise, really needed people to talk to, really needed other entrepreneurs who had plateaued in their businesses perhaps and felt a yearning to grow beyond that, but didn't know how to do it. Who were the people I was talking to that I really believed could offer that to me? And those were the conversations that went somewhere.
It's interesting, right? It's all around this, conversation of shared stories, right? And shared alignment. And are we going in a direction where we can actually provide value to each other, sort of thing. Just thinking about this kind of culture and value piece, right? You built Campminder around this, whether you want to say, I came at it saying I wanted to, have a culture first organization, or whether it was this unlocked process of discovering the values and kind of letting that guide you. At least in my experience, a lot of private equity firms often don't weigh an evaluation of culture as heavily as they do other things, right? And so why should investors care about culture when, financial performance and scalability are what really drives value for them?
If I were a PE investor and I needed a kidney transplant, do I want to get a kidney that my body is going to reject, or do I want to get a kidney that my body is going to accept?
And so by that, you're saying that if you've got a culture first organization, you've got to have a culture first private equity firm, because otherwise there's just going to be resistance there, and there's not going to be a good relationship that leads to a good outcome. Is that the?
I think so. I mean, first of all, it's the weirdest analogy I've ever come up with on the
yeah.
So I don't know how I feel about it, but I said it. The culture is the heartbeat of the organization.
Do you feel like that's universally true? Right? I mean,
yeah. Definitely. It's why everybody screws up in their M&A, because they don't think, they just look at dollar bills, and they don't understand that a company is made up of people. Every company is made up of people, and each person has chosen to work at that company. That's how they're supporting their family. It's how they're supporting their lifestyle. And if people like working at that company, they like working at that company for certain reasons. It's because how it feels to work there. So if you just come in with a stack of dollar bills, everybody can make money in a spreadsheet.
Yeah.
You have a spreadsheet, and I changed this multiple from 2 to 3, and every number has gotten bigger. But what does a company actually have to do to make those dollars real? It implies that every single individual in that company needs to be rowing in a certain direction in a certain way. And if there's a way that people culturally have been doing things and they like being a part of it, and then someone comes in and says, you don't do things this way anymore, and now we value completely different things, that's not going to work great.
So do you feel like private equity and culture first, values driven organizations are at odds with each other?
They can be. No, they don't have to be. I mean, I wouldn't say that we ended up working with a quote unquote private equity group, but it's basically a private equity group. I mean, it's not funded by institutional capital in the same way. And it's people, in my case, I wanted to have people with a very long-term horizon. I never had an exit strategy. I didn't want to have investors who were looking at a date on the calendar and said, we have to have an exit strategy by this date, because the solutions you come up to solve the problems that the customers need, which is the thing that drives any business, are not necessarily constrained by the same time frame that an investor has. So I think that our whole culture, our whole society in the US for too long has been very instant gratification. We need this result and we need it yesterday. And even like forgetting about PE, venture capital, we're going to invest in 10 companies and one of them is going to be successful, but we're going to be happy because that one is a unicorn. Well, that means 9 entrepreneurs and 9 teams with those entrepreneurs are all going to fail, but they don't really care. Like the incentive, when I say the investors don't really care because they get what they want, they get the return. I think that there's something broken about that. And I think that we need to be more, as a society in general, long-term focused. I think we need to be thinking about private equity investments as illiquid investments for a long time. That's just what they are. These are not publicly traded stocks that you can just unload when you want to at whatever price because you want liquidity. If you're going to invest in private equity, you should be thinking about it as a 15-year deal, 20-year deal. And maybe you can come up with some mechanism for someone's capital to be replaced with someone else's if they need liquidity at some point. And there are ways to value private companies and market to market. That can be done. It's done every day. But if private equity wants to have the right outcomes, then you need to align the mission and purpose of the company with its industry. Sometimes certain outcomes take a long time to develop, and we don't want to do things in a way that force something to happen faster than it naturally is supposed to happen. It doesn't mean don't be ambitious. It doesn't mean don't go after big, ambitious goals, but you better be aware of what there's a cause and effect.
Does that also mean removing deadlines from goals though? Like, cause you're talking about like, okay, culture first, right? And like, there's big ambitious goals that we have, but you've also said like, gosh, I don't want to have a deadline that I have to hit a certain performance goal by.
No, I'm not saying that you don't want to have a deadline that you have to hit a certain performance goal by. And I'm actually like, it's not necessarily fundamentally at odds with one another, but like the outcome that you're trying to achieve has to be realistic and attainable. Because if it's not going to be in the best interest of the customers of the company. It's not going to be in the best interest of the entrepreneur or the leader of the company. It's not going to be in the best interest of the employees of the company. So if you have a company that is positioned in a way that has real growth opportunities ahead of it, because maybe the entrepreneur is inexperienced and doesn't know how to do good strategy work, and they don't know how to best go after the opportunity, well then hopefully that entrepreneur wants that growth opportunity and that experience. But I think that you asked what would my private equity company do differently? It would be honest and authentic and transparent with the leader of that company. And if the truth is, we see a lot of opportunity in your company, we're not sure that you have the skills and experience that are necessary to take it where it needs to go, but you maybe still have an opportunity to have a role in this company. But maybe another leader is the right person. That's a conversation that should happen at the very beginning, because the best way to screw up a culture is to lead somebody on to believe that we're going to bet on you as the CEO because that's who you've been. And then we're going to replace you immediately. Great way to lose trust with everybody in that company who probably likes the leader.
Are those the horror stories that you'd kind of heard? Is that like, because I'm hearing this comment where like your impression and your thought process it is that like most firms are not open and transparent about those sort of things. Like, is that?
I don't want to make a statement and say I think that most firms aren't open and transparent about these sort of things. I actually don't know. I think that those people like that certainly exist. That is a thing. Whether that's the majority or not, I can't speak to it. I'm coming from the perspective of how would I want to see it done, and that it is going out of your way to be honest and transparent about what opportunities you see ahead, what you're actually going to be holding them accountable to doing, and whether or not the entrepreneur agrees that that's a good path to go on. Because if that trust gets broken between those two people and then the PE firm on the board has to oust the CEO in a context where that has not been made transparent, that's not going to go well. It can be resolved, and it is resolved all the time. People figure out how to get through it, but it's probably not the best way to go about it. And I think it happens. I think it happens quite a bit.
Dan, I'm curious if you have a framework for evaluating culture. Clearly, culture is paramount for you and your company. If you were, again, in a private equity firm, what would you look for in evaluating a company's culture during due diligence for example? Are there any red flags, positive signals that you'd look for to indicate how a company's culture might impact their success?
It's a good question. It might just be as simple as talking to enough people in the company. I mean, which raises another kind of third rail on my proverbial subway here. Like it's like, for me, when it was time for us to take on investment and to have partners, that was something that because one of my values is be admirable, and it has to do with being like candid and honest and kind and respectful. I felt like out of respect to my team, I wanted them to understand the context that this is something that I was looking into and why. Some of those reasons were good for the company. Many of them were. Some of them were good for me because of what I needed and the stress that I was feeling in my life at that moment. If you're a leader who's looking for investment and looking to partner with private equity, ideally, you can be open and honest and transparent with your company that that's something that you're looking to do and why, and to help try to make people feel comfortable with that. And if you can create that environment, then you can create an opportunity for people in the PE firm to meet with and talk to people in the company. And to me, that's a win-win. One, the PE firm gets an opportunity to engage with real people in the company and understand how do they view the culture? Like I would just ask them, what kind of culture do you have in this company? What do you like about it? What do you think could be better? Just to get a feel for what's going on in that company. But then as an employee, if I put myself in that employee's shoes, that's exciting. I get to like kind of be a part of this process too. And it's not just something that's happening in some, dark room that I have no control over. That's scary for me. Oh, that's a real human being. It's not just like a scary investor. Like I actually like that person.
Sorry, one quick follow-up, right? Like part of any sort of transaction, right, is like both the diligence side of the equation, like figuring out like, are they interesting to us, as well as the other side of them figuring out if they want to join you, right? So like, just thinking about this like culture and value building piece, like if you're sitting there thinking about other, maybe competitors or other companies you might want to acquire, like what are the sort of things that you're going to do to like to say like, gosh, here's why you belong here, and like here's why this is a good fit for our organizations, not just doing the diligence on them, but like convincing them of why they should be with you guys.
Sure. Well, I mean, I think that Campminder is in a unique position. I mean, maybe not incredibly unique, but it's different from. It's unique with respect to a private equity firm. So I think that in our circumstance, we're actually an operating company. I am actually a CEO of a company that over time has, proven to be successful and in the eyes of its clients, most importantly. And there are things that we've done over time to get to a certain scale. And there are lessons that we've learned along the way. And so I am an operator. I am not only an investor, I've done the things. So I have experience, and I've surrounded myself with other really excellent leaders in different areas of what it takes to be successful, at least in a software as a service business, whether that's a chief revenue officer or a chief financial officer or a chief people officer or, head of operations, all of these key roles. So in my context, I think that entrepreneurs are going to be attracted to what Campminder has to offer because maybe they're feeling like they're hitting a ceiling and they don't have people in their corner who can help them. And sure, like if you're making an investment, like if you're acquiring a company or making an investment in a company, you got to have a return on the investment. You're not going to throw your money into a toilet. So you have to believe that company has future growth prospects ahead of it. And you also have to believe that the entrepreneur in that company wants to have the services that you have available to offer them. And the entrepreneur has to believe that the investor has the service, like they have to bet themselves that I'm going to get what I need out of this. Like I see a lot of private equity groups that have like their growth person or their entrepreneur in residence. That could be very helpful. Like that can be a very helpful voice. Do they have people in every area of business? Like sales and marketing and technology. I left out chief technology officer, advisors, or can they connect you with people who are willing to and have the time to engage in a meaningful way and really invest themselves? Like those are the parts of the things that are more important than the money. You can find the money. There's, I don't know how many outreaches I get, a lot, and people have the money. It's the skills and experience and the advice and the help and the support. I want to feel supported as a CEO. This is a hard job. I don't want to feel like I'm just constantly being judged about my performance, and people don't understand the context that's underneath the surface and what I have to do as an operator to push certain things through and the buy-in that I have to create. I want that help.
And so it sounds like what you would be talking about to, prospect companies that you might acquire or merge with, et cetera, is like, here's the value, right? Here's your place. Here's our place to combine, like, here's our combined story, like, and here's the value that we bring to the table and I bring to the table and our team brings to the table as operators and people that know your industry and space. And like, here's what I view our life together looking like. Is that a fair?
Yeah. We're in this conversation, entrepreneur, because, you've hit a ceiling and you want to grow. You're growth oriented and you're frustrated by that ceiling and you feel like you don't have the resources. And I don't mean dollars. Maybe it means dollars. Like maybe I need some dollars to do this or that. But more than that, the experience and the wisdom and like the warning signs about the pitfalls that maybe you're going to experience, the things that maybe we tried over a long time that failed. And why did they fail? How do I avoid those mistakes? How do you, as the entrepreneur, avoid those mistakes?
I think we've talked about how it's difficult maybe to get that across in initial outreach, right? All these things that you've kind of determined were really important in selecting who to partner with. If we can put you in the seat again of someone at a private equity firm, maybe a person who's trying to break in and build relationships with high quality CEOs specifically. And let's say hypothetically, you don't have a direct warm introduction available. What would you do?
Well, I'm scared I'm going to come up with some genius playbook and give it to everybody in the private equity world.
We'll edit it out and keep it for ourselves.
Here's what comes to mind for me. First of all, I think that, a laser beam focuses in one specific direction. And I think that a lot of private equity firms might focus on, like, it might be more of a sprinkler. It sprays in a million different directions. So maybe it's more interesting to focus on a particular area that you actually care about. And so if it comes from a more authentic place, like I care about environmental sustainability, or I care about manufacturing of healthy food products, or I don't know, whatever. The authentic behavior would be like maybe talk to people who are in those businesses, who are customers of the types of businesses that you want to acquire, and ask them, hey, like you work with company XYZ, how's that going? What do you like about the product? How do you think they can improve? What are the things that frustrate you? And it may be more interesting as an entrepreneur to hear from somebody that says, hey, I just talked to Camp whatever. They had some really interesting things to say. They love Campminder, but they think that maybe you might be struggling to get over some barrier that looks like this. I want to, I don't know if that's true or not, but if it's true, we have this CTO who's on our staff or who's an advisor to us, and thought it might be useful. You can look them up on LinkedIn. Here are the things that they've done in their career that are really, exciting. Want to make that introduction? You might not be looking for investment. Like we're actually interested in your space, and we'd love to make an investment. Don't expect it to materialize tomorrow, but I'd like to offer you access to this person. Like that's helpful. That's adding value, and it's grounded in something. And it doesn't just feel like we're a fund that has $1 billion under management and like we can give you money and make you rich or whatever. Like, don't care.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's the pitch I feel like I've heard a million times.
Right.
Like,
it's everyone.
Everyone is like, hey, they come into the pitch oftentimes with like, hey, we have 5 billion under management and we've done 20 deals in this space and 20 deals over here. And we've got all these companies that you know nothing about.
I do not care.
I do not care.
I
right?
do not care.
And if there's one thing that I've learned and heard over time, it's like, I feel, to me, like this feels like the biggest missing piece for I think a lot of folks that are spending time doing sourcing is maybe it's just in humanity in general, but to put yourself in the shoes of the other person.
Yeah, you're a salesperson. Like if you were selling, you're selling your investment, you're selling your team, you're selling the growth person or growth people you have. How do you get into somebody? Like, the gift thing is an interesting one. Like that actually happened we got into a conversation. I actually somebody left a bottle of wine here and it ended up on my desk. And I wrote the person an email. I was like, I appreciate the wine, and I now feel obligated to write you with time I don't have in my life because I don't want to be the kind of person who gets a bottle of wine and doesn't respond.
Right.
Now you resent the wine.
Right. So it's just, if you put yourself in the shoes of like, what is it like to be a busy CEO who has a lot going on? Like, what kind of outreach do you want, and what kind of outreach do you not want? I think it's just basic sales, but I don't want to feel obligated. I don't want to feel like an archery target, to make a camp reference. I want to feel like a human being who cares about his customers and his employees, and who is struggling with something, whether personal or professional. And I want help. Like, every person wants help in some way.
Makes so much sense. If you had to sum up private equity in one word, what would that one word be?
Vulture. Sorry.
Interesting. Why is that?
I think that we just had a long conversation about, I think, how I think about it, and like the humanity of business. And I think that it's probably more common to put that part aside in favor. Like, why do all these emails start with, we have a fund of $1 billion, and not with, I went to camp and you work with my camp. And I think I talked to the director and it's awesome what you're doing. I've gotten those emails. I respond to those ones. If I just think about the percentage of emails that I get from private equity folks, and how many of them I feel like I want to respond to, and how many I feel like I want to ignore, and we don't. Like, I have an assistant who helps, and we want to be kind and thoughtful. We respect that everybody has their job, and we want to be kind. But the ones that I'm going to respond to are the ones that I feel a human connection with, and I think that 8 out of 10 times, it's like, I want something from you. I want your time. It's my time. My most valuable asset they want, my time. So vulture, time vulture.
So we need to the perception of private equity is such, and your push is to, like, how do we humanize that?
Yeah, how do you humanize everything? But yes, this too.
I love it, man. Well, thank you so much for the time today, buddy. This has been awesome. Really enjoyed the conversation.
This was fun. I enjoyed it. I'd never have this conversation. This was like very off the cuff for me. I don't think about these things a lot, so I appreciated the opportunity to do that.